Sales leadership is about just clearing a path. How can I make this an autonomous process for you? How can I clear the friction so that you can run? Here's the guardrails, off you go, and just do what you need to do. And I'll just keep coaching you along the way, but you just off you go. Make it happen.
Welcome to Revenue Insights. We're joined by revenue leaders from some of the highest growth companies. Together, we explore how they built their revenue teams, the journeys they've been on, and the lessons they've learned along the way. Revenue Insights is brought to you by EBSTA. We're an AI-first revenue intelligence platform designed to help you close more deals, retain more customers, and forecast better. Enjoy the podcast.
So hello, everybody, and welcome to today's edition of the Revenue Insights podcast in association with EBSTA. My name's Adam Roberts. I'm the Global Sales Director at EBSTA. I'm sat here replacing Guy Rubin, the usual host today. I'm very lucky to be here with Daryl Weldon, who is the Vice President of Sales for a business called Verisys. Lovely to see you today, Daryl. Look, there's no person in this conversation that's better to introduce themselves than you. So perhaps you could just spend a couple of minutes telling the audience about yourself and a potted history of your career.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today. So, as you said, my name is Daryl Weldon, and I am the VP of Sales at Verisys. I focus on the pharma and pharmaceutical markets. And let's see. So my career, I'm a clinician in physical therapy and practiced for a number of years before I moved into, I'll say, the dark side. At the time that I moved over to the sales arena, it was considered the dark side. But I moved to the pharmacy side of the business in pharmaceutical sales. After I think about 10 years of practicing full time. And, I was in pharmaceutical sales for, I think, 8 years. I moved up the ladder for, into, from being an individual contributor, sales trainer, and then went into management training, and then moved over to tech sales. And moved up the ladder, from BDR, AE, and then to having my own teams. And really in healthcare tech is where I found that's what I love to do. I've been in startups and I've been in large companies, but really my passion is in healthcare tech, really all tech that is improving patient care. So, that really is the trajectory of where I started and where I am now.
Amazing journey. My wife actually is a clinician, and we talk regularly about there's a lot of similarities, or there's lots of crossover between being a clinician and being a salesperson, right? Like, you have to identify pain, you have to understand the root cause, you have to qualify, you have to question, and then you kind of prescribe a treatment or a solution to the problem that the patient's seeing. So really interesting to see you make the transition from clinician through to sales, and there's a lot of similarities there. How do you look at that transition, and what did you take from your clinician days?
It really is a whole lot of similarities, and it's funny because when I did it, just it's great that you and your wife have those conversations, because when I did it, it was like, oh my God, what are you going to do? You're going to do sales? That's crazy, but it seems so very much the same to me, because, the day that I realized that I wanted to do this was, I had a scenario in which I was working with some patients and they needed something that financially it wasn't possible. And I decided that I was going to reach out to the manufacturer and work to have the manufacturer donate it was seating systems for their wheelchair. And, I worked out a deal with the manufacturer to donate the systems, in exchange for, and all, basically I negotiated a deal with them, and, for a case study and all these other things. And it was at the end of the deal, and the patients got the seating systems, and I was sad that project was over. And I was like, wow, I really want to do that, and I'm like, what is that called? And I had to ask people, what is that called? Because in order to do that, I had to sell, the whole process. I had to explain the pain and explain to other people and get agreement and, diagnose and, get the value proposition across to so many different, folks and get that resonating with, all the different stakeholders and get agreement and then get a contract essentially, and I was like, what is that called? And someone's like, duh, it's sales. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that, I've been on this end my whole life. I had no idea. And I was like, well, then that's what I need to be doing, because it was such a big charge, And so that was when I realized it, And so really that's how, that's the whole translation is having that credibility, having that consistency, being that, that consultative approach, no matter who you're selling to, is really, provider leadership, but really just all in on that value prop, understanding the pain, knowing how to diagnose, understanding what, how to sell it to them in language that they understand, but understanding your solution and translating that information in a way that makes sense so that they, that their pain is relieved, and you can get your, what you're trying to do across.
There's amazing similarities and really, really interesting to hear from an alternative viewpoint. So you're a 3-time VP sales now, right? So what initially drew you to sales leadership? You were a clinician. You then you went up through the ranks, BDR, AE, 3-time VP of sales. What drew you to sales leadership? And how did your early career kind of shape that approach?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I'll tell you, my first, into sales, as I mentioned, was in pharmaceutical sales. And I was very, very fortunate that my first sales leader was a former teacher. And so he was phenomenal at, just obviously teaching. And I say, obviously, it's so important that you're constantly coaching, but doing it in a way that is empowering, that is autonomous, that is encouraging, that is, that is leading, not, in a condescending, not that is taking away, but that is pushing forward. And it really is so important. And that is what facilitated me wanting to move forward constantly. I'm a creative seller. I love to just come up with ideas and problem solve how to get something done. And he saw that and he was like, absolutely. How do you want to do this? Oh, great. Well, let's do that, and he facilitated that and encouraged that. And because of his encouragement, it made me want to do that same for others. And so when I've come up through the ranks, I've seen different types of leadership, and the ones that create small voices and the ones that create big voices, and I love to be part of the teams that create big voices, and that's really what made me want to be in sales leadership, because there's so much noise. And really it's about, for me, sales leadership is about just clearing a path. Let me just clear the path for you. How can I make this an autonomous process for you? How can I clear the friction so that you can run? Here's the guardrails, off you go, and just do what you need to do. And I'll just keep coaching you along the way, but you just off you go, make it happen, and that's why.
This episode is sponsored by MailTrap, an email delivery platform built for product companies that send at scale. Go for high inboxing rates. Try today at mailtrap.io.
Absolutely. I was having this conversation the other day, and everybody's, I think most people have been, have experienced multiple styles of leadership and multiple types of leadership, and both good and bad. And I think, I have personally, and I try and model the the good leadership and want to create that environment. And I think I kind of everything that you said there really resonates. What are some of the things that you do to kind of cultivate high performing sales team? Because in the same light, we're in sales because we need to hit a number, and that number is driven by, external growth ambitions. And we have to manage being a good, empathetic, compassionate leader with, at the end of the day, hitting a number. And, that tends to come first. How do you balance those two kind of conflicting things and create that environment while making sure that you're hitting the number?
A couple things. So there's the team that you acquire, and then there's the team that you hire, and so there's so blending those two things together. So in general, developing a high performing team. So, there's the KPIs, right? I want to make sure, number one, that we always have clarity and competencies, right? So here's the KPIs. This is what we have to get to. These are the expectations, and we have to get to these. So I'm crystal clear about what we need to get to, but this is how we're going to do it. Now, let's figure out how we're going to do this together. So we need this, this, and this, and this. So let's figure out, what do we need? So let's go backwards. Okay, so here's our goal. How are we going to get there? And we do this as a group. We do this individually, and then we map out the steps in between, so I'm a physical therapy, right? So we've got our long-term goals and we've got our short-term goals, right? And so it's like, and then these are our daily treatments, right? So it's like, how are we going to get there, right? So it's like, it's all the pieces that just keep coming back to my clinician days. So we got our long-term goals, our short-term goals, and then our daily treatments to get to achieve our goals. It just keeps coming back. So it's, all the pieces in between. And then it's, you set up all the feedback loops, right? So it's the pieces of the dashboards, right? The team dashboards, the individual dashboards, the one-on-ones, all of the meetings that need to happen. So I'm crystal clear about deal reviews, one-on-ones, all the different meetings that we have, they have different purposes. So I want to make sure that, we're keeping church and state separated, right? So it's like, deal reviews are for deal reviews. One-on-ones are for one-on-ones. And I don't want those, I don't want to blur the lines on what everything is for, because it's important that we keep things separated, right? So it's like, when we're going to deal inspect, we're going to deal inspect. I want to make sure that we have the time to go through and discuss and set, okay, what do you think what would be a good next step here? And how can I help you progress that? So today, why aren't they signing a contract today? Okay, so what I hear you saying is, this is a blocker. Okay, so how can we get over that? Okay, so let's go backwards. What do we need to do to get past that? Okay, next deal. So I don't want to detract from what the purpose of this meeting is. So then on our one-on-ones, we're talking about very specific things. What would you like to grow? How would you like to? So when we were doing our deal review, I heard you were struggling on this. Would you like me to set up some time, or would you like to, have more training on this, that sort of a thing. So I want to make sure and do those pieces so that we're constantly learning, we're constantly growing, we're constantly, all of these pieces are in place.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's so important to respect other people's time as well as a leader. I think you can't, if you're consistent and everybody knows what they're going to get when you show up, and you show up for the one-on-one with with the right agenda and a different agenda to a pipeline review, you get a lot of respect, and you get more out of those sessions. I couldn't agree more. How do you balance? You mentioned at the start, you talked about KPIs, and we've got to hit this. We do have to hit this number. We live in that capitalistic world, all of that kind of stuff. How do you balance those, making sure that we're hitting those KPIs, but making sure that the team are focused and motivated towards those, rather than kind of facing burnout?
It does get difficult, right? Because sometimes there's circumstances that that impact the team, right? So, and we need to attend to those pieces. So, there's very specific items that, we'll need to talk about. And we have, I make sure to measure the right things, leading indicators, pipeline coverage, activity quality, deal velocity, things like that, not just bookings, right? And so I want to make sure that I'm differentiating between coaching and inspecting. I want to make sure that I'm understanding their data. I want to make sure that, we're looking to see what we can improve, celebrating efforts and small wins, keeping, making sure that the culture of the team is supportive, right? And so it's one of the things that I focus on when I hire, is that I'm building a culture of support inside of the team itself. And so when I'm hiring, I make sure that everybody understand that I want the team to be able to lean on each other for, hey, I'm struggling with this in my deals. Is anybody else having that as well? Yeah. How have you found success there? That sort of a thing. I don't ever want to sacrifice, the team trust for short-term gains. And so I want to make sure that the team has each other to lean on, at all, for those pieces. So I think that helps a lot in helping to prevent.
Yeah, trust is so important, right? I 100% agree. Had a really interesting conversation yesterday about trust, and it's a really important thing to cultivate. And if you can get it, you get a lot more out of your team, I think. So you've been 3-time VP of sales. You've worked in, smaller businesses and larger businesses. How do you see the dynamics shifting in team management and building trust and building the right environment as organizations scale?
I think it's getting more difficult to get that team environment. It's becoming, the expectation is getting harder to get that piece together. It's one of those things when the whole remote piece was relatively new. Now, sales has always been a remote piece, right? But it was remote to the extent where we were, we would go on site for meetings and whatnot. And really on-site meetings have become fewer and fewer. As that has become, fewer and fewer over the years now, since COVID, it really is becoming less and less of a unit. So it is getting more and more difficult to become a unified, to get that mindset as a unified front, and I think that it is a little more of a struggle, to get people to understand the importance of it until they actually need it. And then they're like, okay, I get it, and, but saying it up front, everyone goes, oh, culture, and it's like, okay, don't old culture me until, it's like, trust me, there's going to be a moment when you want this,
Where do you look as a leader for your own personal development and training? We see it all the time, right? Tends to be the best performing rep gets promoted to a leader, and it's a completely different skill set, completely different mindset as well. So where do you go to look for your own personal development, and how do you think about improving your leadership skills over time?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because there was a time, when you were mentored, right? Like you could actually get on the job mentoring to become a leader, and that's far and few between now. And it's why I'm an executive member of Pavilion, because I wanted to make sure that not only did I stay sharp on my skills, but new skills, right? So like where I'm working right now may not be, the forefront of something else. And so I want to make sure that I don't miss something else because I am focused on this vertical right now, so I just want to make sure that I'm always aware of all of the pieces. And so, that's why I'm part of an executive member of Pavilion, because, I get all of that information, as well as part of, Women of Pavilion. It's just, there's so much information that is available, and, the education component alone is well worth it.
Yeah. Pavilion is a great community. I'm also a member. Ebster are very familiar. We run a benchmark report in conjunction with Pavilion that we publish every year. So absolutely great advice. I think for any listener, if you're not already a member of Pavilion, go check it out. It adds so much value to me and clearly to you as well, Daryl. We're going through transition at the moment, right? The world is changing. The world has changed, right? In a number of different ways. The last decade has all been about growth at all costs. We've had cheap money. Money was spent. You buying revenue today was valuable, whereas we kind of been through that era, and we now live in this era of profitable, efficient growth, where we need to make sure that we're being as efficient and as effective as possible. We've also got the advent of AI. How do you think about leadership and transitioning those challenges, and what are some of the things that you deploy? What are some of the tactics that you deploy every day to manage your teams through those changes?
I know I hear a lot, oh, it's coming for your job. Here's the thing, that my thoughts on it. There's a change that happens. And I think that as an executive leader, I think one of the things that everybody needs to be aware of is the pieces that are changing in those that report to you. So you need to make sure that your skill sets are ready for how to coach, how to lead those that have new skill sets, right? So if you're not staying on top of what you need to stay on top of so that you know what's up, you're going to wake up and find yourself way behind all of a sudden. And so stay on top of your stuff. And so there's that piece. The other piece is that I find is that risk. So growth at all costs was one conversation. Growth is obviously back on the table, but also risk is the conversation now. So it used to be that, we were talking about ROI. We're now talking about risk. So in our messaging, we're talking about avoiding risk, So, I do that a lot now where I'm talking about risk mitigation, as opposed to more of an ROI, right? So there's that piece has now been incorporated in a lot of the conversations that I'm having because, people are doing more with less is a message that a lot of folks are having. And so in that, their why is still part of what they're constantly thinking of, but their why, they're still trying to achieve their why, but they're also still trying to stay, off the news for all the wrong reasons, And so that's really, making sure that you're hitting the risk, so make sure, and risk mitigation, that message hits all channels, right? So that is all levels of leadership. So, you don't have to worry about not being able to multi-thread on that level. You can get that across the board. And then I would also say, as far as your org design, cross-functional is definitely, it's on the 2025 bingo card. It's RevOps and, cross-functional. That is aligning all of, your go-to-market teams to be together is in the go-to-market messaging. I mean, that really is the way that things are going forward, is getting everybody singing from the same, hymnal, playing from the same playbook, whatever your phrase is, that really, that's the way to go.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Like alignment is so key. You need your marketing messaging to be absolutely on point as your sales messaging is your implementation messaging and your customer success messaging. Everything needs to be joined and focused on the absolute value that you can deliver. So yeah, couldn't agree more. I think one of my own kind of thesis is that AI is going to be killer of the average. If you're B or C seller at this precise moment in time, the amount of efficiency that a top performer or someone's really mastered their craft is going to be provided. I can give my best reps, 5 or 3 times the amount of leads because they can handle the workflows, the prep, the admin is reduced. All of the bits of the periphery can be taken care of by AI. I can funnel my leads to be a much smaller pool of reps. And I think what we will see over the next 3 to 5 years is much more efficiency. And I think that businesses that have their data in line are also gonna do really well. But there's a ton of great points there. You did talk about sales skill in there and particular coaching. Are there any frameworks that you use, or do you follow specific techniques that you use to kind of upskill your team?
Obviously, as part of Pavilion, the whole winning by design sales architecture. I'm a Miller Hyman person, so for opportunity strategy. And then there's, revenue architecture principles for go-to-market alignment, so I've got a few frameworks in there that I put in, deal reviews, one-on-ones, for coaching behaviors. So there's, and outcomes, there's a few that I kind of put all together just to kind of keep everything, moving in the direction that I want. It's really, I want reps thinking critically, not reacting. So I try to keep all of these pieces, moving in the direction that I want. And I use those frameworks to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. You've led numerous teams. If you had to summarize the number one lesson that you've learned about leadership that you wish you'd known when you started, what would that be?
I thought that you had to know everything in order to be a leader. And as it turns out, you don't have to know everything. You just have to, know how to ask the right questions. You have to be empathetic. Those are like the pieces. And you have to, support your team. And in doing those things, you'll be a good leader, and it's, supporting your team means different, being a good leader means supporting your team, and it's like a servant leader is I'm there for you. And, I'm trying to clear the friction, I'm trying to move all of the pieces for you so that you can move forward. And, it's, I don't want to sit here and quote the name, Simon Sinek, right? And start naming off books, titles of books, but it's like, it really is, eating last and putting everybody first, but it really is putting everybody first, and just asking the right questions about what do you need from me, or asking the questions about getting down to what is the problem. And so that I can figure out how to at least put the pieces in place to help you solve it, not solving it for you, and those are, I learned that along the way. 'Cause I really, as a new rep, my first sales leader, I thought he knew everything there was to know. And I was like, man, there's nothing he doesn't know.
I've certainly felt that before. But yeah, like we, I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek, right? Leaders eat last. And, people, if you can build an environment of trust, as a seller, you're allowed to make mistakes. We need to own our mistakes. We need to own the fact that we're only going to win 1 in 5 times, 1 in 4 times if we're really good 1 in 3 times. We're going to take a lot of knockbacks, a lot of no's, and you need to be able to look in the mirror and evaluate that, and that's okay. And we need, we create that environment that you are supported and trusted, and it has a profound impact on teams. So I couldn't agree more. What do you think is the number one challenge for sales leaders over the next 3 to 5 years?
I think figuring out how to make these adjustments, because I think that things are adjusting so fast that I think what's going to happen is there's going to be an inflection point of where they have sellers. I'm going to say old school, but it sounds rude, but I don't mean it rude, but it's like new sellers and old sellers, old school sellers at the same time on the same team. And, I think that's going to be a bit of a challenge, right? Because you're going to have those that are like, there's going to be almost like an inflection point. And I think there's going to be those that know stuff, that nobody else knows. And there's going to be that part where they know stuff, everyone is going to know things at different points, but it's going to have to do with AI, and it's going to have to do with technology and how we operationalize getting things done. And that's entirely different than a sales process. And because it's going to be the business of the operations as opposed to the sales process. And so I think that getting the sales executives, the sales leaders are going to have to figure out how to blend that change management smoothly. And, salespeople love change. They handle that very easily. They're usually so cool with it. So it's like, yeah. So, I mean, that I think is going to be interesting to see how that one comes together.
You're absolutely spot on, though. That I'm having this conversation on a weekly basis at the moment, which is, as a sales leader, we need to, or revenue leader, we need to be building a system. And that system has dramatically shifted in the last 18 months because of AI. And we need to be building with architectures of that system and the new system. And it's constantly going to change. And I think change is the only constant that we're going to see over the next 3 to 5 years, right? That's the reality of the world that we live in today. Is the only constant is change. And yeah, we've got to embrace it. We've got to learn. We've got to be prepared to fail fast. And I think, business owners and business leaders need to also embrace that and be aware that this thing is changing. It's coming fast. And, there needs to be an element of trust and leeway. And, it's not going to be right all the time. And things aren't going to be as predictable as perhaps they once were because we're in a much more unpredictable environment. So,
yeah. It's coming fast and furious, and you need to be ready. Like, get your seatbelt ready because you're gonna need it.
Exactly. Look, I've had a really good conversation, Daryl. I really enjoyed it. There's probably 4 or 5 quick fire questions that we do at the end of the podcast. I'd love to if you'll humor me, I'd love to play a little game. Are you up for it?
Okay, let's try it.
Right. Okay, right. So first question, what is your key prediction for the world of RevOps for 2025?
My key prediction, I think that there's going to be a shift from back office enablement to frontline acceleration. I think that there's going to be like this whole shift. Like the tools that were once predictive are going to be like driving seller behavior.
Very, very insightful. What's the biggest trend in RevOps right now?
Unifying revenue intelligence, like what I was talking about before, is like bringing like marketing, sales, customer success, bringing everyone together, single source.
Yeah, agreed, 100%. What's the biggest misconception about RevOps, and how do you challenge that in your role?
I think the biggest misconception is that it's just reporting, and the truth is that it's really a strategic lever. It's so much more. It's a lever that aligns the revenue teams. You're using it right, and that's the thing. And it's a constant struggle to get that. And I think the way to, my hot take, is to pull it out from being under sales and put it under like a CEO or a COO, where it can be, I don't know, I'm going to get all kinds of hate mail, I'm sure, but like, it's where it can be less reactive and more like, and not enabling, you know what I mean? So like, put it there.
Really couldn't agree more. And, for what it's worth, Ebster helps RevOps in many ways. But I think what a lot of companies struggle with is having all of their data in a single place. And therefore RevOps fall back on having to create reports and pull together reports because they don't have access to a single data source, because everybody's using 10, 15 different layers of tooling in their tech stack. And so they fall back on having to produce reporting because you don't have all the data that they need in one place. Whereas you're absolutely right. What it should be is that proactive. We've got the system in place. We know the data points. Let's help drive the outcomes that we need based on these revenue points. Let's have productive, meaningful conversations about that. Couldn't agree more. What's the mistake you see companies making in their revenue operations, and how can they avoid it?
I think that they over-engineer. I think that simplicity is really like, simplicity is where it's at. Like if you have clear ownership in, and feedback loops, that's where you get your results. But I think that if you are over-engineering, you're making it harder than it needs to be.
Absolute gold. Final question, we ask this with every guest, is what is your question for our next guest?
I guess my next question would be, how are you preparing your revenue teams for for what's about to happen, to thrive in this AI enabled environment? Like, how big is your seatbelt? Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. Well, look, Daryl, it's been absolutely fantastic to talk to you today. I hope our audience, whoever's listening, has got a ton of value from the conversation. I know I certainly did. Is there any parting pieces of wisdom or anything you'd like to share with the audience before we depart?
I really appreciate the chat today. Thank you very much for inviting me.
No problem. Well, hopefully our paths will cross at some point soon. For everybody listening, I hope you've had a great time. You've learned loads of stuff, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Take care, everybody.
Great. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Revenue Insights from EBSTA. If you want to learn more from some of the brightest minds on how to predictably and efficiently grow revenue, then subscribe to our newsletter. We'll deliver actionable insights straight to your inbox. Go to ebsta.com/newsletter. See you soon.